Doom reboot dropped in 2016, I didn't know exactly what to expect out of a modern Doom revival. You have to remember that at the time, it had been 12 years since the last mainline Doom game, Doom 3, was released, which polarised Doom fans by taking the series in a very different direction, ditching the fast-paced action of Doom 1 and 2 for a focus on horror, building a tense atmosphere through its slower, more deliberately paced gameplay. So when Doom 2016 was finally unveiled, and looked to be a return to the classic Doom formula of breakneck speed and gory gunplay, it drummed up plenty of excitement. However, following its exciting reveal trailer, a poorly received multiplayer beta led to a wave of skepticism being directed towards Doom 2016. But when Doom finally released, it became clear that id still had the goods. I fell in love with Doom 2016 from the second I laid hands on the sticks. From the frenetic gunplay to the roaring metal soundtrack, everything about Doom 2016 seemed tailor-made to appeal to my gaming sensibilities. Then, when Doom Eternal dropped 4 years later, it took everything 2016 did and ramped it up to 11, with faster gameplay, greater enemy variety, and more intricate level design to showcase the expanded traversal mechanics. So naturally, I adored that game too. And my love and appreciation for Doom 2016 and Eternal has only grown in the years since, and at this point I can firmly say that those two games are my favourite shooters of all time. So when we got the announcement of Doom the Dark Ages, a prequel that sees the Doomslayer once more waging war against hell itself, and looking more badass than ever, might I add, thanks to the new fur cape and shield accompanying his iconic armour, it quickly rocketed up my most anticipated games list, and I went into this game with very high expectations. But those expectations were largely met, as id has once again delivered a sublime shooter experience with the Dark Ages. While the Dark Ages' heavier focus on story doesn't pay off, and its soundtrack is a step down from the prior two Doom games, with Mick Gordon's crushing riffs being sorely missed here, just about everything else remains as fantastic as ever. With its immaculately designed stages that reward your curiosity, wonderful assortment of absurd and brutal weapons that make shootouts more thrilling than ever, and a new medieval coat of paint which differentiates the Dark Ages from its predecessors visually, it has once again proven that they make the most technically sound shooters on the market, and pulled off the impressive feat of creating a trilogy where each entry simultaneously builds upon the ideas of its predecessor, while also crafting its own unique identity and gameplay philosophy that makes it feel distinctly different to what came before. If you've ever seen one of my reviews, you'll know that I normally dedicate a sizable chunk of the video to the story right at the start. However, in this case, can we be honest, is anybody playing Doom for the story? Sure, there are some cool lore tidbits sprinkled throughout 2016 and Eternal, but storytelling has never been id's forte. And try as they might with their expanded focus on story in the Dark Ages, that remains true here. So I will slightly truncate this portion of the video. While id has evidently put an extraordinary amount of money into the beautiful cutscenes of the Dark Ages, the storytelling hasn't been elevated to the same degree. To be blunt, the story is a mess. It's actively difficult not to tune out during cutscenes. The story is so convoluted, boring, and haphazardly thrown together that I had no idea what was even happening during half of the cutscenes. It's the kind of game where the characters' names were already slipping from my memory 2 days after finishing it. Even calling them characters feels generous when they're largely all hollow archetypes. Let's be real, even our protagonist isn't much of a character in the Doom games. The Doomslayer is a walking ball of rage with next to no personality, whose sole purpose is to slaughter thousands and thousands of demons, and I love that, because that's ultimately all he's ever needed to be. But it's also why I don't need some epic origin story for him. I cannot fathom the idea of anyone coming to a Doom game for the storytelling, and I say this as someone who usually loves story-driven games. I mean, Death Stranding is one of my favourite games of all time. Hell, Persona 4 is my favourite game of all time, and that's almost entirely due to the story and characters. But there's a time and a place for dense stories, and a Doom campaign just isn't it. I'm not looking for the intricacies of the Doom world's warring factions. I'm here to rip and tear demons limb from limb. Though perhaps others care more for Doom's lore and stories than me. So for those interested, the quick pitch is that Doom the Dark Ages is a prequel that takes us way back in the timeline to the years before Hell invaded Earth and Mars, taking place on Argent D'Nor, the homeworld of the Sentinels, which has been at war with Hell for centuries, and it begins as the armies of the Night Sentinels and the Makers are fending off an invasion from the armies of Hell led by Prince Azrak, who's trying to steal a MacGuffin called the Heart of Argent. With things not looking good for the Sentinels, they call him back up to turn the tide of the battle, which arrives in the form of the Doomslayer. Though this time, the Doomslayer isn't fighting entirely of his own accord, as he's under the influence of a mind control device called the Tether, that's been implanted in him by his master Creed Maker. Wow, I wonder if that'll be dramatically removed at a pivotal point in the story. It's all so trite and soulless, I can't imagine anyone truly loving and getting lost in this story. Fortunately, while story has never been id's strong suit, gameplay consistently has, and the gunplay is as good, if not better than ever in Doom the Dark Ages. Something I truly love and respect about this Doom trilogy is that it's not a series of standard iterative sequels where each new game just slightly refines aspects of the prior games. Instead, each new entry in this trilogy brings with it a brand new design philosophy that differentiates it from the other Doom games. Doom 2016 was all about reintroducing the boomer shooter philosophy to a modern AAA game. It's snappy, gratuitous, and unapologetically focused on shooting and nothing else. Doom Eternal took the principles of Doom 2016 and cranked everything up to the most heightened degree, making the pace of gameplay significantly faster, while also adding a new focus on mobility through its platforming sections and arenas that offered a ton of verticality. And now the Dark Ages is scaling the speed back down in favour of a weightiness that makes the Doomslayer feel like a walking tank, as you smash through walls and cause demons to explode from the aftershock alone when you jump from higher ground. Saying a character feels tanky can have a negative connotation, but don't get me wrong, this is a game that's weighty in a good way. You feel like a powerhouse, but you also don't feel slow. Doom the Dark Ages is still faster than 90% of shooters on the market, which is something I want to emphasise, as some people have massively exaggerated how slowed down the Dark Ages is. The Dark Ages also mixes the setting up, with the look of its stages drawing far more inspiration from medieval fantasy than the dark sci-fi settings of the two prior games. Since Doom 2016, it has consistently made my favourite feeling shooters, and that's still very much true here. The gunplay remains as impeccable as ever in the Dark Ages, with the game offering perhaps the best selection of weapons found in any Doom game. No developer makes shotguns as satisfying to wield as id, and blowing a demon into chunks with the super shotgun still feels amazing. Seriously, Doom's super shotgun is maybe a top 5 video game weapon of all time. But it's the sheer variety found in the new weapons here that makes Doom the Dark Ages such a delight to play. There's the Shredder, a gun akin to Halo's Needler that fires little barbed spikes into enemies. And yes, there is of course an upgrade to make them explode when you throw your shield into your pincushion of an enemy. The chain shot, which fires a giant metal chain that can effortlessly shatter the armour off of enemies. The accelerator, which shoots bolts of plasma faster and faster the longer you hold fire down. The impaler, a vicious weapon that tears through demons with railroad spikes. And what is perhaps my new favourite Doom weapon, the Ravager, which grinds up demons' skulls and spits out the bone fragments as ammo. It's so ridiculously over the top, and that's exactly what I want out of a Doom weapon. Naturally, there's also a new medieval spin on the BFG as well, because no Doom game would be complete without a BFG. If you watched any of the trailers for the Dark Ages, you no doubt noticed that they heavily showcased the most significant new addition to the Doomslayer's arsenal in the game, his chainsaw-edged shield, which can be used to smash through walls, block and parry attacks, or tossed like Captain America's shield, slicing weak demons in half, or becoming lodged in powerful enemies to stun them, and keep them completely immobilized for a moment while you deal with the cannon fodder. I adore the shield. It's such a wonderful addition to the Doom formula. I'm a sucker for a good parry mechanic in just about any game. There's just nothing more satisfying than perfectly countering a strike, than obliterating an enemy while they're wide open, and the Dark Ages parry feels fantastic. The shield can also be used in tandem with your guns to powerful effect. For example, you'll regularly encounter enemies with metal shields, and if you shoot their shields, they'll heat up and start glowing. Then, if you toss your shield at their overheated shields, it'll create a chain reaction that causes every nearby enemy's shield to explode, instantly killing their wielders. Doom the Dark Ages puts an increased importance on melee combat, offering 3 melee weapons to bludgeon bloodthirsty demons with. A gauntlet, a mace, and a flail. This was very much a Goldilocks situation for me, where the gauntlet has a nice sense of momentum to it, but felt a little too weak, while the mace was satisfyingly powerful, but too slow for my tastes, whereas the flail offered just the right balance of speed and power, making cracking demons' skulls with it an absolute delight. Hitting an enemy with a melee attack will cause them to drop ammo packs, though your melee weapon can only be used when you have a charge to use it, and you can only hold 3 melee charges at once, so the emphasis still very much remains on the gunplay here. The melee combat is more so a way of streamlining the resource management that played a key part in Eternal. In Doom Eternal, you had a chainsaw and a little flamethrower called the Flame Belch. Hitting an enemy with the chainsaw would give you health, blasting them with the flame belch would net you some armour, and performing a glory kill would reward you with ammo. All of this is stripped away in the Dark Ages to simplify things, but in doing so, it has also stripped away some of the depth and strategy. You'll never be at a shortage of ammo, as you can always get more by meleeing an enemy. And even if you don't have a melee charge, there's endless amounts of health, armour and ammo scattered all over the environments. Similarly, the platforming sections that were so prevalent in Eternal have been massively scaled back here, with the focus being squarely on making the Dark Ages a pure shooter experience. Though in this instance, that's probably for the best, as while I didn't mind the platforming sections in Eternal personally, I know many others found them disruptive to the flow of gameplay. While we're on the topic of things that have been stripped out, it's also worth noting that unlike its 2 predecessors, Doom the Dark Ages is an entirely single-player experience with no multiplayer component whatsoever. This was a great call. The multiplayer modes of Doom 2016 and Eternal were not good. They felt tacked on and were seemingly only there to tick a box. The couple of hours I spent with the multiplayer modes in the prior Doom games to get the trophies were miserable experiences, so it was the right call for id to scrap the multiplayer and focus on what they've always done best, which is craft excellent single player campaigns. The thoughtful enemy composition found in Doom the Dark Ages' impeccable encounters has you constantly cycling through everything in your arsenal as you assess the situation and form a strategy based on which enemies you need to prioritise taking out first. You'll run into an arena and instantly equip the pulverizer, as its widespread makes it useful for clearing out the cannon fodder enemies. Then switch over to the cycler, as there are enemies with energy shields that will explode and kill every nearby enemy if their shield is overcharged by a plasma weapon. After that, you might need to take out a tanky armoured mini-boss, so you'll jump to the chain shot to smash through their armour, before finally swapping over to your super shotgun or rocket launcher to tear through their health bar as quickly as possible. One of the main reasons combat is so compelling in the Dark Ages is thanks to the excellent degree of enemy variety. The lineup of demons you'll be decimating in the Dark Ages is once more comprised of both new monsters and returning favourites. One of my favourite aspects of the modern Doom trilogy is seeing how id has reimagined the classic sprite enemies of the original Doom games into 3D models. Creatures like Pinkies, Hell Knights, Mancubus, Arachnotrons, Revenants, and Cyberdemons have been expertly recreated to look completely new and modernised, while still remaining instantly recognisable. The big new addition to the enemy lineup in Doom the Dark Ages is Leader Demons, extra powerful variants that serve as mini-bosses. Leader demons are initially invulnerable, but by killing their minions, you'll lower their morale, which removes their shields, making them susceptible to damage. And slaying one of these demons will reward you with a permanent upgrade for the Doomslayer, increasing his health, armour, or ammo capacity. There are also some full-scale boss fights in the Dark Ages, which I won't spoil, but I did find these boss fights to be the weakest aspect of the gameplay. Boss fights have always been something id has struggled with, and I have the same problems with the bosses here that I've had with their prior games. Despite the bosses having jaw-dropping designs, with a certain Lovecraftian monstrosity found in the Dark Ages coming to mind straight away, most of the bosses are quite boring to fight. They're not challenging, they're just overly spongy, so you spend far too long stuck in a tedious loop of sidestepping projectiles while alternating between parry-shoot for minutes on end. One of the most iconic aspects of Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal was the grisly glory kills that saw the Doomslayer eviscerating weakened demons in the most gratuitous ways imaginable. And in Doom the Dark Ages, this mechanic has been reworked into something called glory strikes. You'll still trigger them by pressing R3 when near a dazed enemy, but they're much more restrictive now, as they can only be activated contextually, usually by jumping before meleeing a stunned enemy. These glory strikes are much quicker than the glory kills of the prior two games, with the idea being to keep the momentum up as you're not constantly having control ripped away from you to watch a lengthy animation. Though fear not, gorehounds, there are still plenty of gross kills as the Doomslayer jumps and slices enemies in half, stomps in heads, and rips out hearts. But all these animations are incredibly quick, probably under 2 seconds apiece. While I understand the idea of scaling back the glory kills, as you did see the same animations over and over again, which could get tedious on repeat playthroughs, and speeding them up undeniably improves the sense of momentum, they are a little less satisfying as a result, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't miss the more flashy animations of 2016 and Eternal. Something I find myself harping on and on about in recent years is games having boring skill trees that aren't rewarding to explore. But Doom the Dark Ages is a gold star example of how to make a satisfying skill tree. The abilities you unlock for your guns, melee weapons, and shield throughout the Dark Ages genuinely change how you approach encounters, by expanding the way weapons work, by adding secondary functions to them. This is a game where you feel your character growing tangibly stronger with each new upgrade. You can return to prior levels at any time in the Dark Ages, and when you jump back into the early stages with your endgame Doomslayer, and see just how quickly you can now tear through them, you realise just how powerful all the upgrades you've unlocked have made you. Doom the Dark Ages adds an extra layer of character customization through its shield ruins. Equipable perks for the Doomslayer's shield that will trigger a special effect when you perfectly parry an incoming projectile, like creating a ground fissure that rips through the floor before slamming into enemies, summoning a flurry of energy knives that skewer distant demons, or my personal favourite, the auto turret, which will pop out of the shoulder of the Doomslayer's armour like he's the Predator, automatically locking on and hammering nearby enemies with a barrage of bullets. While the encounter design is excellent, I should say, if you've played the prior two Doom games, you're going to want to crank the difficulty up to at least ultra violence here. It's instantly noticeable that Doom the Dark Ages is significantly easier than Eternal and even Doom 2016 by default. The Dark Ages encounters are never designed to be as punishing as Doom Eternals could be. I think I only died once or twice while playing through the Dark Ages, while Eternal could be very challenging at points, especially when it would start throwing a couple of the tanky and powerful Ravagers at you at once. The way the Ravagers would relentlessly pursue you while you were under fire from other enemies as well was brutal. Thankfully, for those who crave a more demanding experience, it also gives players the ability to customise the difficulty in a very granular way in the Dark Ages, to a degree few games do. You can tweak things like game speed, the damage you dole out, how much damage demons deal to you, the speed of enemy projectiles, the level of aggression the enemies will approach with, and the parry window for repelling attacks. And I would recommend cranking the parry window down a little if you want a challenge, because it's incredibly generous by default, which stood out even more having come straight off of Clair Obscure, a game that doesn't hesitate to punish you if your timing's even a couple of milliseconds off. One of the few gripes I had with Doom Eternal is with its overarching structure and the way it sent you back to a hub area between missions. The hub was so tedious to navigate and felt like a completely unnecessary addition. I much preferred the straightforward, level-based structure of Doom 2016. Doom is a linear shooter. It doesn't need a hub world. There's no need to get cute and overcomplicate things with gimmicks. So I was pleased when I heard that the Dark Ages was returning to a more straightforward structure, with you just progressing to the next stage from a level select screen. However, while the story progression is completely linear, Doom the Dark Ages 22 stages contain the biggest, most open-ended levels of the trilogy, providing plenty of opportunity to go off the beaten track and explore for secrets. Doom the Dark Ages has the best level design of the trilogy. The maps are big enough to offer satisfying exploration and give you the extra freedom of letting you tackle the objectives of certain maps in any order, but not big enough to be a slog to navigate or feel barren. Every inch of these maps still feels very deliberately designed to make traversal, exploration, and combat as engaging as possible. Doom the Dark Ages is also the first Doom game to implement vehicles into the gameplay, introducing two new styles of levels that were heavily showcased in trailers. The kaiju-style Atlan mech sections, and the stages where you're flying around on a fire-breathing dragon, blasting enemies out of the sky with the lasers mounted on it. The Atlan mech missions are there to provide you with a complete power trip, as you crash through stages, smashing through bridges, stomping on tanks, and punching the faces of the gargantuan Titan demons. The Atlan mech stages are exactly what you expect them to be based off of the trailers. They're very simplistic due to the limited moveset you're given in them. You dodge from side to side, punch enemies, then hit R1 to land a finisher when your energy meter is filled, only occasionally picking up a giant Gatling gun to mix things up a little. But because they don't overstay their welcome, I never got bored of these stages despite their simplicity. The dragon stages were what actually surprised me. You're given a lot more freedom of control in these levels than I was expecting. I don't know why, but I was picturing these levels being linear set pieces, with gameplay akin to Star Fox or Panzer Dragoon Saga, where you're flying along on rails. But in actuality, these levels are open stages where you can fly the dragon anywhere, hopping off at different landing points to complete story objectives or hunt down collectibles. The dragon controls well, and it's undeniably satisfying to chase an enemy through a tunnel system at breakneck speeds, blasting away at them as if you're flying an X-Wing in Rogue Squadron. From what I've seen, these new styles of gameplay seem to have divided the Doom fanbase, and I can see why they're polarising. These stages are objectively a gimmick, but I found them to be a fun gimmick that broke up the normal flow of gameplay in an interesting way. And it's not like there are too many of these levels. There are only a couple of each sprinkled in across the campaign, and the Atlan missions in particular are pretty short, clocking in at under 10 minutes apiece, so you're never pulled away from the gunplay you're here for too long. Interestingly, while the Dark Ages main story can be finished quicker than Doom Eternal's, it actually took me longer overall to 100% the Dark Ages, as the stages are more intricately layered and densely filled with side activities to complete. You'll find all the same collectibles you'd expect in the Dark Ages, like collectible toys of the demons that unlock models that can be viewed in the extras menu, gold that can be spent to purchase upgrades, and there are tons of collectible codex pages for when you want to read up on your Doom lore. It has struck the perfect balance of collectibles in the Dark Ages. There's just the right amount to find in each stage for it to scratch that dopamine hit of collecting, without there ever being so much that it felt overwhelming. Though one little tip, if you're playing on PS5 and have your controller speaker on, go into the menu and turn it off before playing the Dark Ages. I normally leave it on because I find most developers use the speaker in subtle, non-intrusive ways, but in the Dark Ages, the controller sends out the most obnoxiously loud, ear-splitting sound anytime you pick something up, so I had to switch it off before I'd even finished the first stage. Each level also has a selection of 3 optional missions to tick off, requiring you to complete tasks like killing demons with specific weapons, performing melee combos on enemies, or collecting a certain amount of the gold that's hidden throughout the level. I'm a completionist. I love trophies, so naturally I explored every level extensively, as I always do. But when I'm trophy hunting, I often feel myself getting a little burnt out by the end of the experience, and I'm usually well and truly ready to move on by the time I finally get a platinum. But that wasn't the case here. It towed the line perfectly, and I had a great time finding and doing everything in the Dark Ages. A large reason for this is thanks to Doom the Dark Ages' excellent local area maps that highlight everywhere you've explored, making it easy to ensure you've found everything before moving on. This is the rare game where I was able to find every collectible organically without having to pull up a guide, as the game directs you so flawlessly, which is always a great feeling. I also want to give id credit for the Dark Ages trophy list in general. I think this is a practically perfect trophy list. It just asks you to get all of the collectibles, finish all the stage challenges, and fully upgrade your weapons, all of which is fun to do. There's nothing tedious, grindy, or missable, and I was in and out with the platinum in under 25 hours. I know trophies and achievements don't matter to a lot of players, but for those of us who do care about them, we care a lot. Probably more than we should. So it's always appreciated when devs put some thought into crafting a fun platinum, and don't fill the trophy list with get X amount of kills with X weapon, or force you to replay the game endlessly. Doom the Dark Ages is a good looking game, with some of the best environments of the trilogy. As I mentioned before, the Dark Ages has shaken up the look of the Doom series with a focus on more medieval fantasy-inspired locales, with large swaths of Doom 2016 and Eternal taking place on Mars, in Hell itself, and on an Earth that's been overtaken by the forces of Hell. The environments of those two games are very red and orange, and while this is still true of much of the Dark Ages, the additional fantasy elements allow for an expanded colour palette, with the forests, castles and fortresses adding more blues, greys and greens into the mix, which helps to give the Dark Ages a visual identity of its own, separate to that of the two prior Doom games. The Dark Ages, of course, also maintains the grotesque and impressive attention to detail in gore, with chunks of demons' flesh being blown off in firefights to reveal the muscle and bone beneath. But while Doom the Dark Ages looks good, so did Eternal, and I will say, as the first Doom game to leave behind the PS4 and Xbox One, it doesn't feel like a huge visual leap over Eternal by any means. One of the highlights of both Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal was their phenomenal soundtracks that had you headbanging along to crushing metal bangers as you caused carnage. And it's at this point we unfortunately have to address the 8-string guitar-wielding elephant in the room. The scores of the prior two Doom games were written by the incredibly talented Mick Gordon, and his soundtracks were an essential component of those games that helped establish their tones. Mick is an extraordinary musician, and he's become something of a legendary figure in the metal community, as even outside of his video game work, he's gone on to produce music for some of the biggest bands in the scene, including Motionless in White, Bring Me the Horizon, and Architects. As a big metal fan, Mick's soundtracks were certainly responsible in part for making me fall in love with this series. But after a very public falling out between Mick Gordon and id Software during the development of Eternal, and the subsequent release of its OST, where Mick accused id of using his creations without proper compensation and failing to provide adequate support during the development cycle, Mick and id parted ways. While the Ancient Gods DLC for Eternal was the first Doom content since 2016 to not feature any input from Mick, Doom the Dark Ages is the first new Doom game since his departure, and I'm saddened to say the music does suffer as a result. Like the Ancient Gods Part 1 and 2, Doom the Dark Ages soundtrack was composed by a studio called Finishing Move, who have previously worked on the soundtracks for games like Borderlands 3 and the Callisto Protocol. And while their music isn't bad by any means, it's also not great, and it certainly lacks that special sauce that Mick brought to the table. Doom and Doom Eternal's soundtracks are among my favourite video game soundtracks ever, and I still go back and listen to tracks from them regularly, but I feel no inclination to listen to any track from the Dark Ages outside the game. While I'd find myself thinking, that's an awesome riff, here and there, none of the tracks feel particularly memorable as a whole, and it seems like even id is aware that something is missing here, because the use of music feels more subdued in the Dark Ages than it was in 2016 and Eternal. The prior two games were filled with amazing needle drops, where the music would come roaring in full blast to get the blood pumping and hype you up for a big fight, and there are noticeably fewer of these moments in the Dark Ages. With Doom the Dark Ages, it has once again reaffirmed why they're my favourite shooter studio. While the Dark Ages is let down by its subpar story, and a soundtrack that is an undeniable step down from the prior two games, exploration is more rewarding than ever before thanks to the Dark Ages' exceptional level design. The new medieval setting allows for a greater degree of visual variety than any Doom game since Doom 3, and the addition of the Atlan mech and dragon stages mix up the flow of gameplay without bogging down the pacing by keeping you away from the action you come to Doom for too long. Of course, the most important aspect of any Doom game is its gunplay, and Doom's obnoxiously violent gunplay is as wonderful as ever in the Dark Ages. As a matter of fact, combat is better than ever, thanks to the addition of the Doomslayer's new shield, which adds a new degree of dynamism to fights, allowing you to approach combat encounters in exciting new ways. Doom the Dark Ages is an excellent shooter, and it solidifies the modern Doom games as my favourite shooter trilogy of all time. As always, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, subscribe, or leave a comment. You can find a plethora of other videos on my channel, including my recent review of the wonderful Clair Obscure Expedition 33, and be sure to stay tuned for my upcoming reviews of Mario Kart World and Death Stranding 2. Till next time, be well guys!